In the barren expanses of Eon Prime, a place where rolling dunes of ash and cracked earth stretched beyond the horizon, a solitary figure trudged forward, his mind as weary as his body. His name was Dax, a scavenger by trade, a wanderer by necessity, and he had lived most of his adult life among these blasted sands, collecting scraps from fallen ships or half-buried outposts, trading the salvaged technology and metals for a scant handful of energy credits. The sky above him, tinted a permanent copper hue, signaled the approach of the dreadful storm known only as the Veil. It was no ordinary tempest. Its thick, toxic clouds carried an acidic rainfall capable of dissolving metal, flesh, and hope in equal measure, and whenever it descended upon the wastelands, the wise found shelter or perished. Dax's breath rasped in his throat as he peered through his battered visor, smelling the tang of ozone, the acrid hint of the oncoming storm clinging to the air like a curse. He had survived many such storms, but each occurrence brought fresh terror. Perhaps it was the knowledge of how the Veil devoured everything, leaving behind corroded ghosts of what once was. Or perhaps it was the unrelenting memory of those he had lost long ago. Either way, Dax had learned to never underestimate the storms or the savage environment that molded him. Today, he was searching for a rumored crash site where a small interstellar vessel had been lost during re-entry. He expected to uncover a few valuable components, maybe a power core or leftover rations that could sell for a modest price. Time was short, however, for a roiling band of storm clouds marched across the horizon, flattening the wasteland's gritty plains with its malevolent approach. If he didn't hurry, whatever cargo remained in the wreckage would be reclaimed by the fury of the Veil. His eyes scanned the gloom until, at last, he spotted a faint glimmer of twisted metal in the distance. Mustering what little energy remained in his weary bones, he broke into a brisk jog, the wind rising behind him, carrying a swirl of dust that scratched at his mask. Moments later, he reached the downed vessel. Its broken hull resembled a fish gutted by a feral predator, gashes and twisted plates peeled back, sparks flickering from severed conduits, a cloud of smoke clinging low to the ground. Without hesitation, Dax set to work. He pried open a partially dislodged door and slipped inside, stepping over the charred remains of broken crates and damaged consoles. In one corner, he discovered what appeared to be a small crate of survival supplies. Quickly, he cracked open the lid to find 2 sealed nutrient packs, a short-range transmitter, and an emergency water filter. Not a grand haul, but enough to trade. He stuffed them into his battered satchel and moved on, keenly aware that the Veil drew closer. As he moved toward the front of the vessel, the hull groaned in protest, threatening a total collapse. He froze, half expecting the structure to come crashing down around him. The overhead lighting flickered in dismal throbs, the final protests of a failing reactor somewhere behind ruined paneling. He pressed on, determined to at least scavenge the flight console. The cockpit area was a tragedy of broken screens and shattered glass. Wires dangled from the ceiling like mechanical serpents, occasionally spitting sparks. Yet in that hazy dimness, something else caught Dax's eye, a figure slumped against a bulkhead, partially hidden by a collapsed beam. Carefully, he approached, uncertain if this was a living being or a corpse. His visor's readouts indicated faint life signs. Through the swirling haze, he discerned that the figure was female, an alien with features both fragile and regal, her skin an ethereal shade that seemed to shimmer even in the dismal light. She was breathing, but barely. Tendrils of dark hair, damp with sweat, were plastered to her forehead. The entire left side of her body was pinned beneath the fallen beam, and from the tension in her face, it was clear she was in agony. Dax's heart pounded. If he helped her, he might be caught in the storm. If he left her, he'd have more time to escape. Yet he found himself unable to turn away. Something in her expression, perhaps the silent plea in those large, dark eyes, stirred empathy he had tried long ago to bury. Steeling himself, Dax knelt and tried to free the woman. The beam was heavier than it looked. He had to leverage his entire weight to move it inch by inch. Gritting his teeth, muscles burning, he finally managed to shift it enough to drag her out. She cried out softly, an anguished moan escaping her lips as the pressure lifted from her leg. Time was short. The Veil would not wait. Outside, thunder rumbled like the roar of some celestial beast, the sky darkening by the second. Acidic droplets began to patter against the ruins, sizzling on contact. The veil was upon them. In one swift motion, Dax hoisted the woman over his shoulder. She was lighter than he expected, though every step jolted her and drew pained gasps. Slipping through the broken doorway, they emerged into a world cast in greenish gloom, the ground hissing as acid began to eat into the top layer of dust. Dax ran, his suit's plating stinging under the corrosive drizzle. The nearest shelter was a small outcropping of rock, where a cramped cave might offer a modicum of refuge. With a final burst of effort, he reached the jagged formation, darting inside just as heavier sheets of acidic rain hammered the landscape, the sizzling wind raging in his ears. The cave was pitch black, smelling of stale air and old minerals, but for the moment, it was sanctuary. Gently, Dax set the alien woman down, checking her vital signs. She seemed stable but unconscious, her leg badly bruised and bearing a jagged gash on the lower thigh that oozed pale, bluish fluid, her blood, evidently. With quick, practiced movements, he bound the wound and administered a coagulant shot from a half-used syringe he'd scavenged months ago, hoping her physiology wasn't too different from that of humans and other common species. The storm raged outside. Thunder boomed, reverberating through the cavern, while acid-laced winds shrieked like tortured ghosts. Dax knew it could last hours or even days. He turned his attention back to the woman, noticing again the faint, shimmering scales on parts of her skin. She wore sleek, advanced clothing bearing a stylized star insignia with arcs swirling around it. Likely some high-tech organization. His instincts screamed caution. Helping her could drag him into unknown danger, but leaving her to die outside had felt unthinkable. Time seemed to freeze under the assault of the veil. Dax rummaged for a glow stick and cracked it, casting a weak, bluish light around the cave's stony walls. His meager supply of rations might last a day, maybe two. He considered exploring deeper into the cave for alternative exits, but decided to stay near the entrance in case the storm let up. In any case, his companion was in no condition to be moved further. Hours crept by. The alien woman, still unconscious, occasionally murmured in a soft, melodious accent. Dax caught fragments of words, some in his own language, others in an unfamiliar tongue. Her face contorted as though she were trapped in feverish dreams. He dribbled water between her lips now and then, ensuring she didn't dehydrate. Though he knew he owed her nothing, each small act felt oddly necessary, as if repaying a debt he could not name. Eventually, the woman stirred more fully, her eyes fluttering open to reveal deep violet irises. She gazed at him, confusion flickering across her features. When she tried to speak, her voice came out as a hoarse rasp. "Water, please." Dax offered his canteen, tipping it carefully against her lips. She drank in trembling gulps before sagging back, breath unsteady. He waited, uncertain what to say or do. At length, she swallowed, forcing out a ragged whisper of gratitude. "Thank you." He nodded, feeling strangely self-conscious under her intense gaze. "Don't mention it. Can you tell me your name?" She hesitated, as though sifting through memories. "Lira," she said softly, then closed her eyes in apparent exhaustion. They waited out the storm in tense camaraderie, forging a fragile bond. When Lyra's pain allowed her to speak again, she managed to convey snippets of her situation, though haltingly. She hinted at being pursued by dangerous forces from her world, referencing advanced technology and a stolen device. Dax's curiosity flared, but he let her speak or remain silent as she chose. It became clear that she was no mere civilian. At long last, the veil began to diminish. Outside, the greenish clouds thinned, and the acrid stench eased. The ground remained treacherous with acidic puddles, but time was of the essence. Dax helped Lira to her feet. She winced, but insisted on hobbling under her own power. The two emerged into a wasteland scoured clean by the storm. Metallic husks jutted from the ground like rotting bones, the top layer of terrain dissolved into sludge. Their destination lay some miles away, a makeshift shelter Dax had pieced together from an abandoned bunker. With careful steps, they navigated the pitted ground, acid still steaming in shallow pools. The journey took hours, each step a testament to Lyra's will to survive despite her injury. Dax watched her with a mixture of worry and growing respect. At times, he offered his arm for support, which she accepted with quiet gratitude. Night fell, though on Eon Prime the distinction between day and night was often blurred by roiling clouds. When at last they reached the bunker, Lira was trembling with fatigue. Dax guided her inside, a cramped space cluttered with salvaged equipment. He helped her settle on a threadbare sleeping pallet in a corner, then used the last of his antiseptic to clean and redress her wound. Her eyes flicked open and shut, exhaustion laying claim to her senses. "Thank you," she whispered again, voice trembling. "I owe you my life." Dax shrugged, trying to mask the unease gnawing at him. "You'd have done the same for me," he said, though he was not entirely sure of it. Still, the thought comforted him. He had spent so long bracing himself against the cruelty of the wastelands that he had forgotten the simple solace of offering help to another soul. In the days that followed, Lyra's leg wound slowly began to heal, though her limp persisted. She slept often, waking in fits of pain, haunted by nightmares of being tracked. When she was lucid, she revealed more of her past. She had worked in a research facility on her homeworld, Orexia, a place renowned for its biotechnology. There, she had discovered the creation of a subdermal implant that could manipulate not only location signals, but possibly even the neural pathways of its host. Horrified, she tried to destroy the project, only to become its unwitting test subject. Realizing the sinister potential of what she carried, she fled her world. Now, elite enforcers pursued her, determined to retrieve the stolen tech or eliminate her. "It's embedded in my spinal cord," she explained, her face taut with anxiety. "Removing it could kill me, but disabling it is my best hope. They can't track me over great distances if I keep it scrambled, but if they come within range, they'll detect me." Dax ran a hand over the stubble on his jaw, recalling how the wastelands offered no easy hiding places. "Then we need a more permanent solution," he said. "But on this planet, specialized help isn't exactly around every corner. Do you have a plan?" She looked away, uncertainty shadowing her features. "I tried to escape Orexia, but they shot me down here. The ship, it's gone. And if the enforcers come, they'll kill anyone with me. I can't ask you to risk yourself further." Dax surprised himself by letting out a short laugh. "You think it's not too late for that? I already pulled you from a wreck in the middle of the Vale. I'm in this, whether I like it or not." He paused. "Look, I know a place, Raven's Edge. It's a rough settlement full of mercenaries and smugglers, but also black market tech dealers. If there's gear anywhere that can cloak you from those enforcers, we'll find it there." Lira nodded slowly, relief softening her features. "I'll go with you, once I can move without collapsing." 2 more days passed, each a cautious respite. Lyra's condition improved, though a limp remained. Dax shared what meager rations he had, and in the quiet hours, they spoke of many things. She asked him how he ended up alone in the wastelands, a question he deflected at first, but eventually he relented. He told her of losing his only friend to raiders, of the betrayal that left him without a true home. He had drifted ever since, scavenging just enough to survive another day. "If I'm honest," he confessed one night, voice low, "I'd forgotten why I ever bothered to help people in the first place. This place, it strips you down to survival. But when I saw you there, pinned under that beam, I couldn't leave." She reached out, resting her scaled fingertips on his arm. "Then there's still kindness in you, Dax," she said gently. "And if we survive this, I hope you never lose it." Eventually, they gathered their things, stepping out under a sky tinged with murky yellows and reds. They traveled by night to avoid the worst of the scorching heat, forging a wary path across dunes of ash and twisted scrap. Twice, they spotted what looked like other scavengers, but kept their distance. Lyra's hood concealed her unusual appearance. The shimmering scales and violet eyes would invite dangerous curiosity. Dax kept a hand near his battered pistol, eyes scanning the horizon. Raven's Edge appeared on the 3rd night. A broken ring of metal walls rose against the gloom, its perimeter guarded by watchtowers of welded plates. Faint neon signs flickered behind those walls, offering the promise of trade and treachery in equal measure. The settlement was notorious, a haven for smugglers, gunrunners, and exiles with nowhere else to go. At the main gate, 2 armed guards eyed them suspiciously. Dax slipped a few credits into the waiting hand of the larger guard, who grunted and waved them through. Inside, the settlement was a tangle of cramped alleys, neon-lit stalls, and the perpetual din of commerce. Vendors hawked questionable wares, from antiquated blasters to mutant beast parts. Groups of drifters lounged around barrel fires, eyeing newcomers with predatory interest. "Stay close," Dax murmured, guiding Lira through the labyrinthine corridors. They ducked under a flickering sign reading Corinne's Tech Emporium, a small shop jammed with devices, some half-functional, others clearly worthless junk. At a cluttered workbench in the back stood Corinne, a wiry man with cybernetic goggles perched on a heavily scarred forehead. He glanced up as they approached, snorting in recognition. "Dax, you've been scarce. Last I heard, you were rummaging in the outer flats." Dax shrugged off the greeting. "I've got something I need, Corinne. High-end frequency dampening. My friend here," he motioned subtly to Lira, "needs to avoid some advanced scanning tech." Corinne raised an eyebrow, noticing Lira's hooded figure. "That's so? Must be important if you're bringing it to me. Dampeners aren't cheap. They need specialized components and a stable power source." Dax set a bag of salvaged electronics on the counter. "Will this cover it?" The tech dealer rummaged through the parts, eyes gleaming at a few valuable items. "It's a start, but for the power cell, I'll need something top-grade. I happen to know about an old terraforming station in the northern wastes. Word is, it still has an active comm array. If you manage to yank the power core from there, I can rig a dampener that'll hide your friend from all but the most invasive scans." "Deal." Dax felt a surge of frustration. Traveling to the northern wastes was perilous, the environment brutal, and rumors suggested raiders had staked it out. Still, what choice did they have? He glanced at Lira. She met his eyes, expression firm. "We'll do it," she said quietly. Corinne smirked. "Excellent. Bring me that core, and I'll set you up. Until then, don't bother me." Leaving Corinne's shop, Dax and Lira prepared for the trek north. They pooled their meager funds to buy med patches, fresh water canisters, and protective gear. The marketplace vendors drove hard bargains, and the acid-scorched currency in Dax's pockets dwindled rapidly. At last, they slipped out of Raven's Edge, disappearing into the dark plains beyond. For days, they traveled the bleak expanse. Each dawn found them hiding from the punishing sun. Each dusk brought them forging onward by the faint glow of the planet's sickly moon. The terrain grew more barren, scattered with twisted remnants of old machinery and the occasional bleached skeleton of a desert beast. Lyra's limp persisted, but her resolve remained unwavering, even as the dryness and dust choked them. On the fifth night, the unmistakable outline of the terraforming station rose from the horizon. Once, it had been a marvel of engineering, meant to transform Eon Prime into a hospitable colony. Now it lay in ruin, battered by centuries of storms. Towers jutted at odd angles, metal beams twisted like ribbons, and partial domes lay collapsed. A single, flickering light glowed atop a tall spire, perhaps powered by an ancient generator that refused to die. They approached cautiously, weapons drawn. Dax led them around the perimeter, eventually discovering a gaping hole where a side wall had collapsed. Carefully, they slipped into a dark corridor strewn with debris. The stale air clung to their lungs, and their footsteps echoed ominously. Inside, the station resembled a graveyard of forgotten ambitions. Rows of consoles covered in dust and rust, half-broken cargo loaders, skeletons of unknown workers lying in corners. Emergency lights cast an eerie red glow in intervals down the main hallway. Lira clutched Dax's sleeve, scanning for signs of movement. Eventually, they reached the central chamber housing the comm array. A towering console stood in the center, its monitors cracked but still faintly humming. Thick cables snaked around the room, leading to a cylindrical reactor in the back wall. That must be the power core, Dax thought. But the place was not empty. A small group of raiders, each wearing mismatched armor and wielding patchwork weapons, lounged around the console. They had not yet noticed the intruders. Lira tensed, and Dax lowered his voice to the barest whisper. "We can't take them head-on if we can avoid it. Let's see if we can skirt around, get the core, and leave." But luck was not on their side. As they started to edge around the perimeter, one of the raiders glanced their way, eyes narrowing. "Hey, who's there?" Chaos erupted. The raiders sprang to their feet, guns raised, shouts echoing off the hollow walls. Dax fired a warning shot, forcing them to duck behind a bank of machinery. Lira crouched low, clutching a small pulse dagger she had salvaged. Bullets and energy blasts whizzed overhead, kicking up dust and sparks. "Find cover," Dax hissed, ducking behind a rusted transport crate. Lira slid next to him, breathing raggedly. The raiders closed in, their footsteps crunching on shattered glass. Dax peeked around the corner, returning fire with his battered pistol. His shots kept them from advancing, but did little else. One of the raiders lobbed a makeshift grenade that clanked across the floor, spewing a cloud of noxious gas. Dax and Lira coughed, eyes burning, forced to scramble back. Another shot grazed Lira's arm, drawing a hiss of pain. Anger flared in Dax's chest, pushing him to retaliate. He leaned out, took careful aim, and squeezed the trigger. A raider yelped as the bullet found its mark, collapsing in a heap. The others spread out, flanking left and right. Knowing they couldn't hold out forever, Dax pointed to the power core behind the console. "We have to get there," he shouted over the din. Nodding, Lira mustered her courage and broke into a limping sprint, weaving between discarded equipment. Gunfire echoed from every direction. Dax laid down covering fire, drawing the raiders' attention. One raider rushed him, a serrated blade flashing in the dim light. Dax grappled with the attacker, both tumbling across the floor. The raider snarled, hurling curses, but Dax managed to slam the butt of his pistol into the man's temple, knocking him out cold. Meanwhile, Lira reached the console, rummaging through sparking cables to locate the cylindrical reactor. She found the access panel but discovered it was locked by a corroded latch. Growling in frustration, she pried at it with her dagger. A stray bullet struck the console, narrowly missing her, and she flinched. With renewed desperation, she dug her dagger into the latch, forcing it open. A hiss of pressurized air escaped, revealing a glowing, fist-sized power cell nested inside. Clutching the cell, she turned to see a raider aiming a rifle at her. Time seemed to slow. Before he could pull the trigger, Dax tackled him from behind, sending the shot wide. The energy beam ricocheted, scorching the ceiling. Lira scrambled back, her heart pounding. "Got it," Dax shouted, disarming the raider with a swift kick. She held up the cell, its glow reflecting in her wide eyes. "Yes, let's go." They retreated the way they had come, ducking under crossfire. The few surviving raiders, disorganized by their casualties, didn't give chase for long. Still, bullets pinged off walls, and the station reverberated with the roar of conflict. At last, Dax and Lira found their way out through the collapsed wall, plunging into the wasteland's open darkness. They kept running until their lungs burned, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the station. Only then did they slow, collapsing behind a ridge. Dust coated their throats, and the hush of the night pressed around them. Lira clutched the power cell, tears of relief threatening to spill as she caught her breath. Dax laid a shaky hand on her shoulder, scanning for pursuit. None came. "We did it," she rasped. "Somehow." He nodded, exhaling a shaky laugh. "Let's hope it's worth it." They took what rest they could before pushing on through the night. Their journey back to Raven's Edge was punctuated by acid rain showers, forcing them to seek cover more than once. Lyra's limp grew worse, and Dax worried the bullet graze might become infected. Still, the thought of the frequency dampener and the prospect of finally freeing Lira from the Enforcer's clutches drove them onward. Yet the wastelands had other perils. On the second day, a sleek, dark shape appeared in the sky, its engines emitting a low, ominous hum. Lira paled. "Enforcer craft," she whispered. "They found us." The ship's silhouette cut through the haze like a predator closing on prey. Panic jolted them both. They had nowhere to hide on the open plain. As the craft descended, dust swirled in a vortex beneath it. Then came the piercing whine of an energy cannon charging. "Run!" Dax shouted, seizing Lyra's hand. They sprinted across uneven ground, the craft pivoting overhead. A searing beam scorched the sand, sending shards of rock flying. Another blast thundered past, narrowly missing them. They dove behind an old crawler vehicle half buried in debris. Its rusted hull offered scant cover, but it was all they had. "Stay down," Dax hissed, scanning the battered cockpit. He wrenched the door open, finding a control panel coated in grime. Desperate, he flipped switches. To his astonishment, the engine coughed, lights on the console flickering. "It's got a little juice," he said, voice trembling. Get in. Lira slid into the co-pilot seat, clutching the power cell. The Enforcer craft roared overhead, unleashing another volley. A glowing bolt slammed into the crawler's flank, melting metal, but the engine roared to life. Dax gunned the accelerator. The vehicle lurched forward, wheels churning the sand in a squeal of protest. A fresh barrage of fire rained down, scorching the ground on either side. The crawler rattled violently, smoke pouring from a ruptured panel. Yet it lumbered onward. Dax spotted a narrow canyon ahead, its walls twisting into labyrinthine passages. "We can use that for cover," he shouted. They barreled into the canyon, scraping the crawler's sides on jagged rocks. Overhead, the Enforcer ship strafed the canyon rim, seeking a clear shot. Light blasts sizzled against the canyon walls, sending cascades of stone tumbling. At one point, a near miss caused the crawler to skid sideways, throwing them against the cockpit walls. Dax fought the controls, heart hammering. At Lyra's side, the power cell rattled dangerously. Finally, a beam struck an overhanging ledge, collapsing it onto the ship's flank. The impact set off a chain reaction of crashing debris. The Enforcer craft careened into the canyon floor, exploding in a plume of fire and twisted metal. Dax and Lira shielded their faces from the inferno's heat, the crawler limping away from the scene until they emerged on the far side of the canyon. For long moments, they sat in stunned silence, the crawler's engine wheezing. Then Dax let out a ragged breath. "We're alive." Lira sagged with relief, tears shining in her violet eyes. "I thought that was the end." Though the ship was downed, neither of them felt truly safe. They abandoned the crawler soon after, its systems failing. For the rest of the journey, they trudged across the desert on foot, each step a test of endurance. The Enforcers might still be out there, perhaps sending reinforcements. Yet the stolen moment of survival lent them a fierce resolve. At night, they huddled together for warmth beneath the stars, and Dax felt a new closeness to this woman whose life had become entwined with his own. Eventually, the grim walls of Raven's Edge loomed once again. Exhausted, battered, they passed through the gates without question, the guards too lazy or jaded to care. They hastened to Corinne's shop, ignoring the crowds that parted around them, each onlooker sensing the raw desperation in their faces. Corinne's eyes widened at their scorched attire and ragged forms. "You look half dead," he muttered. "Did you get it?" In answer, Lira presented the power cell. Corinne whistled low, scanning it with a handheld device. "Impressive," he admitted. "All right, hand it over. Let's see if this baby still has enough juice." He fiddled with it, then nodded. "Looks workable. Good job surviving long enough to bring it here." Dax could hardly contain his impatience. "Now hold up your end of the deal." Corinne grumbled, but led them to a cramped back room. "Lie down," he instructed Lira, gesturing to a metal exam table. "I need to interface this cell with your subdermal implant. Gonna be painful. And no, I'm not giving you anesthetic unless you've got extra credits." She winced but obeyed, biting her lip. Dax hovered close, hand clenched into a fist, torn between worry and anger. As Corinne powered up a series of surgical tools, Lyra's eyes met Dax's. Fear shimmered there, but also trust, a fragile, precious thing. The procedure began. Sparks crackled across Lyra's back as Corinne probed the base of her spine. She stifled cries of pain, her fingers digging into the edges of the table. Dax watched helplessly, each whimper from Lira a dagger to his chest. After what felt like hours, Corinne attached the dampener housing, connecting it to the power cell with spidery wires. The odor of burned flesh and metal fused in the air, making Dax's stomach turn. Finally, Corinne stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. Done. The dampeners integrated and should mask her from Orexian scanners. It's not foolproof. If an Enforcer is close enough, or if they have more advanced gear, they might still detect her. But short of that, she's a ghost. Don't expect a warranty. Lira gingerly sat up, trembling from the ordeal. She pressed a hand to her back, feeling the patch of fresh bandages. Relief warred with lingering pain, and she managed a weak smile. "Thank you." Corinne rolled his eyes, already rummaging through the salvage they'd left. "Just get out of here. You'll scare off my paying customers." Dax helped Lyra stand, supporting her weight. They left the workshop, stepping onto the neon-splashed streets of Raven's Edge. Though exhausted, the sense of danger that had hounded Lyra now felt distant, muted by the dampener's protective shroud. She was finally free from the immediate terror of being tracked, and Dax felt the tension in his own shoulders ease for the first time in weeks. "Let's find a quiet place," he murmured to Lira, "and figure out what's next." She nodded, violet eyes bright with hope. "Yes, and maybe we can leave this planet altogether. My ship is gone, but there must be a way." He couldn't suppress a faint smile. "If we can patch something together, or find passage, I'm game. Eon Prime is too harsh. We both deserve better." They slipped away from Raven's Edge under cover of night, returning to Dax's hidden bunker to rest and plan. With each step across the wasted plains, the rising sun cast pale light on the battered land. Yet that light now felt like an omen of new beginnings. Days later, they reached the bunker, battered but unbowed. As dawn's rays crept into the stifling shelter, Lira settled onto a makeshift chair. Dax knelt at her side, examining her bandages. Her injuries from the station and the procedure still needed tending, but she radiated a resilience that he found remarkable. "I can't stay here," she said, voice soft yet determined. "I've been a fugitive for so long. I've forgotten what it's like to have a life that's more than running. But now, I dare to hope." Dax brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead, heart twisting at the vulnerability in her gaze. "I'll help you," he murmured. "We'll fix up a ship, or trade for passage, and get off this rock. Maybe find a place where neither storms nor enforcers can hunt us." She smiled, the simple curve of her lips like a sunrise in this world of ash. "Thank you, Dax. You risked everything to save me." He shrugged, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "I told you, I couldn't just leave you to die in that wreck." But in truth, it was more than that. Lyra's presence stirred something in him, a sense of purpose long dormant in his life. In the days that followed, they labored together, gathering spare parts from abandoned outposts and the battered shell of Lyra's crashed vessel. Slowly, they assembled a rudimentary star-faring craft, coaxing life from rusted thrusters and salvaged reactors. Each setback threatened their resolve, yet they pressed on, side by side, forging a bond in sweat and determination. Meanwhile, the dampener Corinne had installed continued to cloak Lira from any wandering scans. No enforcers arrived. No storms of acid consumed them. For the first time, they tasted a fragile peace. At last, their makeshift ship stood ready on a flat stretch of ground. The vessel was hardly impressive, a patchwork of scavenged plating and sputtering engines, but it hummed with the promise of flight. Lira, leaning on Dax's arm, gazed up at it, eyes shining with a blend of wonder and apprehension. "Will it hold together?" she asked, half smiling. Dax chuckled dryly. "If we're lucky. We'll have to fly carefully, keep an eye on the instruments. But it should get us off the surface. Then we can chart a course for a safer sector." She nodded, then turned her gaze to the wastelands stretching around them. "I never thought I'd miss anything about this place," she said softly. "But I'll remember it as the world where someone showed me kindness, where I discovered I'm not alone." Dax squeezed her hand, a flutter of something like hope stirring in his chest. "Let's get out of here," he said, voice husky with emotion. They boarded the craft, strapping in as the engines whirred to life. Smoke billowed from the rear thrusters, and the ship lurched ominously. For a moment, it seemed they might never leave the ground. Then, with a shuddering roar, it lifted off, dust swirling beneath them. Higher and higher they climbed, the cracked planes of Eon Prime shrinking below. In the cockpit, Lyra's hands shook, whether from pain, excitement, or both. Dax kept a white-knuckled grip on the controls, heart pounding. At last, they broke through the planet's polluted cloud layer, emerging into a pale sky strewn with drifting debris in orbit. The battered craft trembled, warnings blinking on half the consoles, but it held steady. A laugh escaped Lira, tinged with disbelief. Dax grinned in response, relief flooding his senses. They soared past the husks of old satellites, the glare of Eon Prime's sun catching the ship's jury-rigged wings. Once they were safely in the emptiness of space, Lira keyed in coordinates for a distant sector rumored to be safer. With a rumble of the engines, the craft turned, preparing to slip away from the planet's gravitational pull. Dax glanced out a side viewport, catching one final glimpse of the swirling storms below. "Good riddance," he murmured. Then, he looked at Lira, who met his gaze with a soft smile. "Thank you," she said again. But this time, her words felt broader, deeper, encompassing not just her rescue from the acid storm, but every risk he had taken, every act of faith. Dax swallowed, aware that their journey together was only just beginning. And so, as Eon Prime dwindled behind them, its storms and wastelands fading into the black of space, Dax and Lira ventured toward a future neither had dared to imagine. Their path would not be easy. Enforcers might still lurk among the stars, and the cosmic vastness held dangers unknown. Yet they faced it together, survivors bound by trust and tempered in adversity. They had chosen hope over fear, forging a bond that promised a tomorrow beyond acid rains and tracker signals. And in that fragile choice lay the seed of something wondrous, a chance for two lonely souls to write a new story among the endless stars. In their battered craft, hearts full of resolve, they left Eon Prime, carrying with them the lesson that even in a world devoured by storms, compassion could be found, and from it, the spark of something like love. In the weeks that followed, Dax and Lira labored tirelessly, forging a more reliable vessel from the patchwork they had already created. Piece by piece, they scavenged or traded for better modules, tested life support systems, and calibrated navigation instruments. Each dawn brought the same bleak starfield outside their viewport, but every dusk was met with a fiercer determination. With the tracker disabled, Lira was truly free to shape her destiny, and Dax found a purpose greater than simple survival. At times, she guided him through Orexian data logs or leftover records, seeking any clue to ensure the enforcers would not intercept them. Other days were devoted to adjusting the dampener's power flux, or gathering enough resources so they would not starve. Small, vital steps in building a life that transcended their pasts. At last, their newly upgraded craft shimmered under the faint glow of distant starlight. They exchanged a final look at the last vestiges of Eon Prime, a planet now far behind them. Then, they angled the ship's nose toward the cosmos. Its engines rumbled with promise. Together, they left every acid storm and empty ruin behind, setting a course for the unknown. Side by side, they soared into the void, hearts beating in unison, more certain with each passing second that their journey had only just begun. And with every heartbeat, they held on to a truth forged in harrowing nights and desperate dawns, that even on the harshest of worlds, the smallest act of kindness could change a life, and that no matter how deep the darkness, there was always a light waiting to be kindled, if only two souls dared to find it together.